You are listening to News Talk 790 WPIC. Sharon Hermitage, a Cumulus station sponsored by the Ridgewood at Shenango Valley, a premier senior living residence.
Under pressure in Yemen, services for the New York fire victims. I'm Molly Page. The UN Security Council is set to meet this hour for a closed emergency session to discuss the tension situation in Yemen. Senior UN correspondent Richard Roth is in New York and says Yemen's president is the one who called the meeting.
He's hoping for some dramatic action from the UN Security Council, which I'm not sure he's going to get. This is a beleaguered president, in effect almost on the run now in Aden, a part of Yemen that is right now not in the hands of the Houthis.
Yesterday, U.S. troops were evacuating a southern air base crucial to America's drone strike program after al-Qaeda militants seized a nearby city. Funeral services also being held this hour for the 7 young siblings who died in yesterday's early morning house fire in Brooklyn, New York. Their mother and sister are still in critical condition at a burn center. The victims were between the ages of 5 and 16 years old. Their bodies will be flown to Israel for burial. I'm Molly Page. A Southern California attorney has filed a petition for a ballot measure that would permit the execution of gay people with a bullet to the head. Correspondent Jim Roop reports.
Orange County, California attorney Matt McLaughlin is calling his proposed measure the Sodomite Suppression Act.
It's terrifying and almost laughable in the same breath.
Donald Benz is with the Sacramento LGBT Center and tells KXTV that it's also unbelievable.
And if it does get to the ballot, just the firestorm that this is going to create and the hate crimes that could result from that.
The state attorney general's office is reviewing it, and if it moves forward, McLaughlin would need more than 300,000 signatures to get it on the ballot. And there is also, by the way, a call to the bar to review McLaughlin's mental stability. Jim Roop, Los Angeles.
Insurgent is the top draw at the box office this weekend. According to Rent Track estimates, the second installment in the Divergent series raked in $54 million, nearly matching the opening of its predecessor, Divergent. Cinderella is number 2. I'm Molly Page.
Johnny wants to be a performer, and everybody knows school costs money. Johnny wants to know what he has to do to become a performer. Plus, he needs experience before he decides to spend the money for school. Johnny's confused. He has no one to talk to about his choices. He then hears an ad on the radio about Media8tor Arts Academy, where he can perform, network, train, and find a place to prepare for school. Johnny has found a place to expand his talents to make his decision and also increase his resume. Now, let's explain how Johnny got signed up. He went online to Media8inc.com and clicked on register. They called him back, asked him what his vision was, then found a place for him to perform. Whether it's theater, music, or movies, as long as Johnny is willing, Media8inc.com is able. And that's the story of how Johnny became a performer through Media8 Arts Academy.
A brand new Audi SUV is leaving San Francisco for New York today. The only thing unusual about that is this car won't have a driver.
Don't be concerned if you're driving somewhere in the U.S. over the next few days and an Audi SUV passes you with no one in the driver's seat. It's just the Delphi Automotive self-driving car. Delphi Lab Director John Nabsmeyer told the website CNET.com that the time has come to hit the road.
We're really taking this chance to test our automated highway pilot and collect a lot of information to improve the technology.
To avoid crashing, they combine digital maps with a whole host of sensors.
It has radar, which are high-volume mass production sensors.
Forward vision systems recognize signs, lights, lane markings, and pedestrians. The driverless car will arrive in New York in time for the auto show next month. Steve Kastenbaum, New York.
Senator Ted Cruz will make his presidential campaign official tomorrow. One of his aides says Cruz plans to make his announcement during a speech at Liberty University in Virginia. I'm Molly Page.
This is a dangerous groups that we're dealing with now. It was a nightmare.
Flight 807, you're clear for landing. Runway 7, Bravo. All personnel report to the nearest tornado shelter. This is not a drill.
If you need help, then dial your operator.
Have no fear, fellow citizens. The Mediator is here.
All doctors to the ER. All nurses to the nurses station. Code blue 305.
marble. Apartments, you can see this evacuation notice on one door.
Rolling. Motion. Roll sound. And
dangerous groups that we're dealing with now.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the mediator of democracy, Brian West. Here in the studio, we have my friend, the first published author at Media8tor, Kristen Olmi. Kristen, are you there?
I am here, Brian. Good to be here.
Perfect. We're going to talk about her book. She published a book. It is called Winning Elections for the Public, a Blueprint for the Public Servants and Us All. We're going to talk with her about that today. Before we talk about the topic, I want to discuss a little bit about what the meaning of politician is. A politician is a person who is involved and influence public policy and decision making. A lot of people don't know that, and a lot of people are afraid to get into the business of politics. So that's what we're going to talk to Kristen about. We're going to talk about her book. We're going to discuss her intentions and what she feels and why she wrote this book. Kristen, so how are you today, Kristen?
I'm good. I'm very good, Brian. I'm happy it's a sunny day in the north quadrant of the United States here, so we're happy about that. A little colder than we want, but I'm good.
Yes, I'm without Sparks today. Sparks got sick, so it's just me and you today, Kristen. So let's talk about this book now. You wrote a book that is specifically designed for people who want to run for office. This book it goes in detail explaining the process. Tell us why you wrote this book, Kristen.
Well, I mean, I guess I was sort of, I was trying to figure out why people are interested in politics, or why they're not. Is the more likely thing when you ask somebody, you say, are you interested? Would you like to run? You get a lot of people who vote, but they don't actually, they're not actually interested in being a part of the process as a candidate. So I had this notion that maybe if somebody had guidance, or a kind of a how-to, if you will, they might be more inclined to want to run. Yeah.
Now I did some research from a book. It's called the Penguin Guide to the United States Constitution by Richard Beeman, and he talks about in the first the preamble to the Constitution. Now, if anybody knows about the Constitution states it was a declaration to get us from Great Britain, and what was happening in that era was the fact that the king was being negligent. It was a lot going on. So Thomas Jefferson and a gang of his fellow comrades decided that they were going to declare their independence. And many people do not know the history on how this country was developed, but when they created the Constitution, the preamble simply says that when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one person to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal stations to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle, and it goes on and on. So what Thomas Jefferson was trying to do, he was trying to create a political tie from Great Britain and to create his own independent state. So that's where the nature of politics come back. Now, when we talk about public servants, Kristen Olmi, and your book, tell us the idea when you came up with this idea. Why? What influenced you to write a book to try to get more people involved in public service?
Well, I mean, look, if you're just going to quote the preamble of the Constitution, I think you have to also remember that, the beginning, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. Yeah. And the idea of, for, and by, of, for, and by the people requires then the people to actually participate in the process. Yeah. So that was my main goal, and why I was interested in. There's so many people too who, complain about the process or the politicians, and that's fine. But I'm one of those people that, if you're going to complain, maybe you should want to do something about it instead of just complaining. So put yourself out there and be a candidate yourself. But then again, we get back to my original, question. People aren't sure what to do, how to run, what office to run for. What do you even do? You wake up one morning, and you decide, hey, I want to run for my local school board. Yeah. How do you do that? So that's sort of what my target audience is, anybody that's sort of interested in the political process, but not so much the
just pretty much
how to make a law, how to run.
Now, for anybody who doesn't know, Kristen Olmi is the first female published author at Method 8 besides myself. So I had a part in publishing this book. And every time I'm around Kristen, she has such this beautiful aura about herself. She's just so into public service. And so tell us a little bit about yourself, Kristen. What influenced you to get into the field of just writing books and just serving the public as you do?
Well, I grew up in a household that was very much raised upon the notion of public service, whether that be volunteering for, the local food pantry and distributing food, or, getting involved on your local school board, or just even going out and helping, shoveling driveways in the neighborhood for older folks. That was just we kind of grew up with we were sort of instilled in the notion of sort of being in this for the greater good, or, service above self, shall we say. So that kind of, I was interested in that, but I was also interested in figuring out how do you get things done. Okay, I have this giant pothole on my street. Who's responsible for getting that pothole filled? And that led me to learn and want to learn and understand the process, which then led me to, want to figure out why more people aren't involved.
Yeah. Now, your book talks about the ethics of politics more than the game. It talks about the academics of it, the process, and the process of getting involved and things like that. So when you talk about that, do you think anything has changed? I mean, you talk about the people getting discouraged and not wanting to run for office. Do you think anything has changed in politics?
Well, I mean, certainly over the last 40 years, you have a much more weary public, and a lot of folks, point back to, major events in the specific to politics in the, in the 60s and 70s that saw radical change, such as, the Kennedy assassination and the Nixon resignation, and people started to, felt that politicians and politics itself was corrupt.
A lot of people still feel that way.
Well, yes, but at the same time, and right, that's what I'm saying, the last 40 years, and that's my point, though. At the same time, less people being involved leaves a smaller field where that doesn't really solve your problems. It's corrupt, but at the same time, if we're only going to have, close to, only around 40% voting, then that's not really, going to fix your problem with the system, so to speak.
Me and my buddy Tim, we were just in here and we were talking about that particular topic, about how hard it is in this new day and age to be a politician because of all the regulation and the bureaucracy and things like that. Now, you're talking about that. Now, that's on a national scale. I think what you're focusing on is, are you focusing on the local politicians, like the candidates for local office, or are you talking about on each scale?
I prefer, the book, I think, is definitely the magnitude it takes to run for, a statewide or national election is not really what I'm speaking to specifically in the book, nor is that what I really have an expertise in. I've worked more on local campaigns with local candidates, so it's more of a local focus. Plus, I actually think local politicians have a more direct effect on your everyday life. Necessarily than a United States senator from a state across the country. Now they all affect your life. There's no doubt about that. But in terms of getting involved, my focus is more on a local aspect.
So why do you think? Now this is interesting. I've read most of, I say about half of the Constitution, which is not too many people do that in their spare time, but I choose to dibble and dabble in it. And what I noticed about the guys who, they call them the founding fathers, but there was a lot of people involved, so I always like to say they. And when they were writing, it seemed like they were very sensitive on their writings. It seems like when they were writing it, they were going through they must have been going through a lot of things because of the fact that they tried to make it in favor of the people, and it was basically talking about it. The main thing I learned about the Constitution, it talks about the responsibilities of the political office of a politician. It talks about their allegiance to, just to to serve the public. Do you think, as a new upcoming author, that the United States has kind of strayed away, or do you just think it's just not the right people getting involved into the political field?
Well, first of all, there's to answer your question, I'm going to break that down into two parts. There's folks who believe that the Constitution is a living, breathing document and evolves over time, and then there's folks who just think the Constitution should be interpreted as it was written in 1787, give or take. I fall in the latter, that it's a living, breathing document. So
yeah.
What the founding fathers wrote and conceptualized, is obviously the greatest democracy created.
Yeah.
Stood the test of time, at least thus far. But at the same time, there's elements of the Constitution that I'm happy to see evolve, such as the amendment that gave women the right to vote.
Gave women and slavery and all that.
Yes, obviously there's elements that I'm happy evolve. But I think that today what you get is first of all, I think it's a myth that I do not believe that all politicians are corrupt. Obviously I don't, because I wouldn't have wrote a book that's asking people to consider public service.
Yeah.
I think that people, because of the pressure, because of television, because of social media, because of exposing yourself to so much, that does make people want to shy away from public service.
Yeah.
But again, that's people those are national characters.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people know? Very rarely is your local school board member live exposed. It's not. Those are people who are just known within the neighborhoods, known within the smaller communities, and that's where I think you could start to see a grassroots movement of people who are interested in getting involved that may never have thought of getting involved before.
Yeah. Now
that could change your trajectory.
I heard you mention that you admired the amendment. I believe it's the 19th Amendment, if I'm not mistaken, that gave women the right to vote. I believe. I'm not gonna say it for solid, but I believe that it. Now you talk about women in politics. Now, what role do you think women since that era do you think they play in politics, Kristen?
Well, I certainly today's Congress there's 20 female United States senators, and that is actually the most that have ever been serving in the United States Senate at the same time. I think that's positive. Obviously, that's a positive direction. But when you're talking about a country where 50% of the population is female, there's certainly, I think it would benefit the United States and local, state, and federal government if more women were involved. And actually, there's elements specific that I talk about specifically in the book that, there are things that women tend to shy away from politics because of elements that it takes to run and win, such as, they might not think they could raise funds to mount a good campaign or something like that. But I think that's why I wrote the book, to kind of say, no, you just have to work through the process. And absolutely, I believe there should be more women involved. And I think that only makes sense. Especially when you're talking about decisions that, about education and things that should have a diverse opinion in order to fully flesh out an issue and talk about it from all angles and figure out, see, my personal perspective, the point of governing and being a good politician and being a good elected official is, you have to put and make decisions every day based on whether or not you think they're going to be helping the most people possible.
I agree.
Are you going to make everybody happy all the time? No, absolutely not. And it's foolish if you think that you can can get involved, and that's going to be a component of, you know, what you're trying to do. But can you make decisions that are going to benefit, you know, the majority of people in a positive manner? Yes.
Well, I mean, for everybody out there, let me let you know where to get Kristen's book from. You can purchase it at method8inc.com. Just go to books and movies, or you can go to amazon.com. Her book is available now. She is well accomplished. She's got a master's degree in I believe in political science. She's got some other credentials as well. Again, this is method8inc.com. You're in the media with Brian West. We're going to continue to talk with Kristen a little bit about her book. If you want to donate to the program, method8inc.com. Feel free to donate anytime. We cater to Americans, that we are in mediation. That's why I say I'm the mediator of America right now. So, Kristen, let's get into this talk a little bit more now. We talked about your vision for females in politics. Now, I like to bring up Thomas Jefferson a lot in their creation of these documents and the signing of the petitions and the things like that when they rebelled against Great Britain. They created this great nation that we have. And the Constitution talks a little bit about voting. Now, voting, we'll break it into that a little bit, because right now they're talking about how they're trying to stop certain groups of people from being able to vote. Now, one thing I've noticed about your book is the title. Your title is very important to me, because even when we were talking and we were publishing this book, you emphasized on how you had to have that title for the public servant in us all. Now, when you see the attack on certain sections of Americans where they don't want their vote, how does that make you feel? Especially because I know you, Kristen, and you serve. You fall down and you get up. I've seen you at nonprofit events, and you're just like dedicated to public servant. Now, what does that say about the vote, the political bloc when you see things like that?
Well, I mean, as upset as you can get, per se, at the legislators and the politicians that are trying to do that, I mean, ultimately, I'm also a believer that, you know, the people have to rise up. They have to say, no, you know, if you're talking about, you know, specifically some of the changes that are trying to make to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that has to be, people have to be aware that that's going on. I think two major things need to happen in this country. One, people need to start caring more about things that you know, matter. And then once you start paying attention, you have to also be able to at least educate yourself, at least to some degree, to make an articulate argument one way or another, and then realize how important voting is. I mean, when I say the public servant in us all, it's because I mean, at the end of the day, every single person that participates in our democracy by voting is therefore then a part of that democracy. And that's sort of, you know, if at the bare minimum, if at the bare minimum, at the lowest level of, you know, public service and entry into, you know, being involved in the political system is voting. And that should be a responsibility that everybody that is, you know, 18 years of age registers and takes part of. I mean, I think it's, personally, I think it's a very, you know, dangerous thing to want to mess with, you know, allowing people, you know, I believe we should have easier access to voting. Well, don't put up barriers, you make things easier, because, you know, in a true democracy, your ideas should win you your election and support of the people, and you shouldn't have to be concerned that, well, I'm only going to win if we limit voting. So a certain population that thinks like I do is the only population that's voting. No, democracy and, you know, should be won on, elections should be won on ideas, candidates' ideas, what they're going to do, what they're going to bring to the people. So, I mean, I think at the same time, you could get angry about that, or you could do something about it. And that's sort of why I, you know, a part of the whole reason for writing the book was, you know, I'm mad. Not only should we be voting, but we should be considering running for office ourselves.
Now, question, Kristen, you mentioned something that was that's interesting. You said that candidates do certain things to minimize the vote. Do you think that that's strategically done for the disallowance of a certain group of people not to vote?
At a national level, voting strategy to either turn out electorates or get electorates to stay home is absolutely a strategy.
Oh, wow.
There's no doubt about that. I mean, but again, that's sort of.
Yeah, well, we won't get to it. Let's get back.
The national beast, which is a whole. I'd need 5 shows just to cover.
Well, you did. I do notice, though. I do notice that in the book you talk about the presidential office and you set it aside. It's almost like you went towards the core of the communities, which I admire about you, Kristen. And you kept the. I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to give people a focal point to start off. With the ambition, the vision, and then continue on. And what I also liked about the book, Kristen, is you talk about how even if you don't win, there's still things for people to do. Let's talk about that a little bit. Even if they don't win office, what else can a public servant do to try to stay in the hunt?
Well, what's interesting too is think about this. Every week, all over the country, every single, council or township or any of that nature has meetings, and they're public meetings. They have to be public meetings. It's part of the law to conduct, public business in the open. And how many people attend a council meeting or a school board meeting? Usually it's the members that the elected members that have to be there.
Yeah.
Staff that has to be there. And maybe a reporter that has to cover the meeting, and maybe 1 or 2 people. I mean, that's something that that would be one thing that somebody who maybe ran for elected office and then wasn't elected to stay involved, to keep people, you keep people honest by having other people there and seeing what goes on. Obviously, there's membership of, at becoming a member of a community organization or group that's interested in devising sustainable change, coming up with things they could do to help the community. Volunteer work is extremely important. I mean, I know tons of nonprofit organizations want volunteers to either participate in their activities or become a board member.
Yeah.
Those are things that are, non-political, but even political, just staying involved with, any local political organizations there are, or attending functions where you could speak to your, elected official. A lot of things you talked about, things that have changed earlier, and something that just came to mind with that question you asked. Now, I was at a League of Women Voters function a few months in January, part of a legislative update, and a state rep said how he remembered, at the beginning of his career, he received a lot of mail correspondence from constituents.
Yeah.
And he was saying how he remembered that a lot of constituents and people always sent letters inquiring about projects or asking questions or seeking his assistance. And he said that has dwindled substantially.
Yeah.
That he does very, very rarely does he get calls from citizens or letters.
Yeah.
And that's something else you could do.
Now go ahead.
You could pick up the phone and call your state rep. You could send a letter, send an email. Obviously, we do a lot of things via email today, but that's something that people don't even, think to do. If you have something that you see in your neighborhood that should be, if you have a pothole, you could nicely call whoever, whatever road department or road crew and say, hey, I'm sure you're aware, but I want to let you know that this is going on. It's kind of funny. It's one of those things. If you don't ask for something, you don't know that it could happen.
Now we talked about this before, Kristen, because the United States is the most. If anybody doesn't know, this is the most established and most. And if even in biblical terms, if you read about the idea that God in the Bible had for Israel, he did not. If anybody knows the scripture, it talks about how first he didn't want a king at first, but the people wanted a king. So it seems like the United States is almost like that ground where this is for the people. And I think I talked to you about the importance of democracy and what it does to people around the world. People will fight and they will die for democracy. They will die for their freedom. So why is it so? So I think what you're saying is that if the people don't get involved, it kills democracy pretty much.
I mean, that's pretty as blunt as you can get, but in a sense, yeah, absolutely.
That is interesting. And one thing I did notice, and what I always like in your book is you go into the streams, like you talk about the political advertising, the war room, pretty much you put them in the culture of politicians. Tell us a little bit about the culture of politics. What is it like? Is it like Scandal, or is it different from that? Tell us a little bit about the culture, Kristen.
I think you have a lot of. I think you have Scandal, you have House of Cards, you have all these political shows that they make it much more political theater than I think it really is. There's aspects, sure. There's aspects of those stories that have, some grounding in reality, but TV's TV, and that's a medium that I don't know what that says about us as a country, though. That those shows do so well. So is that do we actually want our politicians to behave that way?
That's deep. That is deep.
But I mean, I'm not sure what it says when that many people they think politics is actually always like that. I think what I have found working certainly with local candidates, countywide candidates, is there's obviously a level of humanity that people don't see.
Yeah.
When you run, when you're an elected official, when you're running, you're putting yourself out there, you're putting your family out there, you're putting your ideas out there. And not only that, but when you run, I have never met a politician that was running that I honestly believed that they were running for, all these terrible reasons. When you run, you're running because you think you could make your community a better place to live, a better place to work, and a better place to raise a family. I found more often than not that even somebody that say I didn't agree with their position, or I didn't perhaps everything about their candidacy wasn't something that I was interested in supporting, that still doesn't mean that they're not a good person and that they're not running for the right reason.
Yeah.
I found the humanity is a good word. There's a lot more of a human characteristic. I think same thing with celebrities. I would guess I don't know any celebrities, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But I would guess that there's a lot more. They're a lot more human than we want to believe.
Yeah. It almost makes what you're saying is pretty much the center stage. Almost makes them seem like they're unhuman, kind of like.
Yes.
Well, now.
And I mean, there's not. I've never been in a situation where, like, I don't know if those backroom doors. Those backroom deals exist, because I've never been in a situation where I've been invited, hey, come back here and we're going to make this decision and we're going to make it. I've never been involved in any of that. I don't. If it exists, I can't speak to it because I've never been in a room where that's ever been a discussion. So most of the people that everybody that I've had the pleasure of working with I've been proud. There's not a candidate that I really would look back and say, oh, I shouldn't have worked with that candidate, or I'm not proud that I did. Most of them I feel were, running for the right reasons, wanted to make a difference, and were somebody that I enjoyed on a personal level as well as a professional level.
I mean, sometimes, me myself, I do get a little discouraged with the decision making because, My take on it is you do read when you look up on the founding of the Constitution, it talks about when the political system was even thought of, it talks about how there are certain cabinets that are supposed to be separated up or supposed to be treated a certain way, almost like royalty, and the divineness of it talks about foreign policy, like certain people are supposed to be allies in peace, certain people are supposed to be not allies in war, and things like that. And one thing I did notice that they emphasized was they talked about how America, even when it was founded, there was some things. I hate to say this word, but they talk about ignorance. They talk about ignorance a lot, and they say that even in the foundation of this country, this great country that we live in, there was ignorance. And I think Thomas Jefferson and you had Andrew Adams, you had a few others. They were talking about the concept of slaves. I think they had talked about the slavery debate that was going on back then, and I think when I was reading some of the passages, you could sense that Thomas Jefferson, it seemed, because if anybody doesn't know, if you haven't read up on any of the history of how this country was founded, there are some passages in there where you could actually see these guys being sympathetic, and there are some passages where they were unsympathetic. But it seems like Thomas Jefferson was the one who was like who had a lot of integrity. I believe he thought, instead of the eagle being the bird of America, he thought he wanted to be the turkey. So this is just stuff that was going on. But when it comes to the slave trade and things like that, when they had broke with England, I think they wanted. I think what they see now, how everybody is starting to get a voice, I think that is what they probably vision, because I don't think. I think when they had, because it seems like Thomas Jefferson noticed that when he was writing these documents that he had to get rid of some of his old habits. That's what it seems like, Kristen. Honestly, I don't know what your take on it is, but when you
Jefferson was, he I guess if you really, I'm not, they didn't have like these liberal and conservative classifications, but Jefferson was very much, he was anti the power centralized.
Yeah, that's what it seems
government.
like.
He was a statesman. He was very interesting. Interesting. I've always kind of admired John Adams because I think John Adams, he was the second president of the United States, right? So everybody remembers, George Washington, and Washington kind of gets all this credit as, the first president, the most, kind of. I think Washington towers over a lot of the early founding, not only founding fathers, but the first, I think really 5, 6, 7, 8 presidents. When you ask children or you ask people who don't have such an interest in American history and the government and the formation of the United States, Washington gets probably the most, kind of the most.
Yeah, he does good. Yeah,
but actually, I find the relationship between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson is actually very fascinating. They died actually within a few hours of each other, and Jefferson actually passed away first, but John Adams received his correspondence, and one of the last things John Adams says was Jefferson lives.
Yeah.
In actuality, Jefferson had passed away.
Oh wow.
Like right before, you could read a lot of their, I believe a lot of their correspondence has been published to date. They corresponded a lot in later life about, that time, about founding the nation and things and direction and so yeah, that's your
I just thought
take.
Yeah, I just thought, Kristen, because whenever I read the process, I always like to go through the process of how things had been, came about. This political system just didn't happen overnight. It took time. It takes polishing, and sometimes people get disappointed. Sometimes people are happy. And one thing I've noticed about the word the evolution of democracy is what it has amounted to today, and the fact that, like, when I was listening to an interview about Selma, and they were talking about how at first, when they were fighting the fight to end segregation, the process of the migration of slaves and things like that, and they were talking about how they had got to that point. He said at first, I can't remember the name, I can't remember off the top of my head, but he's talking about the bridge, and he was talking about the emotion of it, how it tied into what we've become today. And he said at first he did not feel that the United States was worthy of fighting for. He felt like it wasn't a system that was for the people. He said until he saw the people uniting together and coming together, and that's one. And even right now in the economic situations, people still cannot figure out how the United States is able to rebound, and a lot of people look up to the United States. So let's talk a little bit about the future of politics. Kristen, do you think are you pessimistic or are you optimistic about the future of the United States politicians?
I'm optimistic because I think that as bad as people may perceive things to be, it's those same people who have the opportunity to change them for the better.
Yeah.
I think that it's really going to be interesting to see what happens. We're on the cusp of a generational change.
Yeah.
You're at a point where, for the last X amount of years, the majority of people who voted were baby boomers.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
The generation before the baby boomers are seeing the unfortunately the end of the World War II generation.
Yeah.
Because of age and the sands of time, so much so to speak. I think that it's an optimistic time for some younger people. This is a time if you're between the ages of, 18 and 35 right now, you can really be shaping the politics and the policies of the next generation,
yeah.
the next 50 years. I'm optimistic. I also, am somebody that I also surround myself with people who, not everybody who thinks the same as I do,
yeah.
but people who want to be involved, who want to make a difference, who are involved in whether it's through their church or a charity,
yeah,
or their work, or want to work on so many different things. I'm from Youngstown, Ohio, so there's a lot of positive change going on.
Yeah, there is actually
in that area. There's a lot of development. There's a lot of that can be attributed to young people who finally, they wanted to get involved to help rebuild the city. And the same could be done for the political system and politics. It just has to be people have to want to get involved on all levels, and especially locally. We're 5-6 weeks out from a local election here.
Yeah.
The primaries here in May will have a lot of city council races,
yeah.
a lot of races where that's gonna be interesting on how you could change.
Yeah. Now, one thing, Kristen, that I've noticed that the founding, they, I would like to call them they. I don't like everybody I think had a part in the founding of the United States. I think there were some key players, but I don't like to say they. I like to say they. So they really didn't talk about the separation of government. They really didn't talk about Democrats. They didn't talk about Republicans. They didn't really have classifications. You had some people who were activists, and you had some people who were, statesmen and things like that. What do you think about that? And since you're representing this book that says "Winning Elections for the Public," blueprint for the public service in us all, what do you think about the way? Do you think that is elitist, or do you think when they talk about the classification of people like conservatives, liberals, or Democrats or Republicans, do you think that's fair?
Well, I don't think would it be good to not have any labels and just elect a person on that person and what they're going to bring to the table. Sure, sure, but is there something wrong with identifying yourself in a particular way so it gives you a broad platform to run with? I don't know. I'm not sure.
It's
an interesting perspective. Washington said that political parties would be the collapse of democracy.
Oh.
Did you know that?
Oh, yeah, actually, that's new knowledge for me. Knowledge.
No, actually, Washington was very. He didn't believe in the political party system. But then, actually, John Adams ran as a Federalist.
Okay.
So you had then by the president number 2, you had a political party label. I think the labels have changed over time. They've swapped. I mean, if you look at, Abraham Lincoln, for example, ran as he was a Republican.
Yeah.
I'm not sure today that he would associate with the Republican Party today as it stands.
Yeah.
That's just personal perspective for what it's worth.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure. I mean, if we didn't have any political parties and people just ran on their ideas, that would be cool. But at the same time, then people who had the same ideas would cluster together, and would they just rename themselves something else? Probably. Yeah. You know what I mean? I think people always want something to identify with. I don't know, good, bad, or indifferent, but I think people like, identifying, look at our sports teams, you identify yourself as a fan because you like to be with people who are cheering for the same thing that you are.
That's funny.
That a characteristic of human nature?
Yeah.
You just want to be associated with people who you think are on the same page as you? I mean, I don't know. I don't know that ultimately, let's pretend tomorrow we got rid of all of the political labels.
Yeah.
But people would still run, and eventually they would be like, oh, well, that person's ideas are X, so are mine. Let's form this new party. So I don't know if we just will keep cycling through. Would we be better off beyond just the two-party system? Sure. I think most people feel that way.
I'd be a part of the hippie party where we just we try to establish peace, and a bunch of radio heads will all sit around and sing songs all day. Well, another thing I wanted to ask you, Kristen, was you talk about the importance of finances when running a campaign. The majority of Americans right now, if you ask them about contributions, just contributing to the cause. And when you talked about this, supporting a candidate who has the same just moral agenda as you have, and this I was raised by hippies, so I'm liking seeing people who get up there and talk logically about diplomacy and peacemaking across the world. So that's the type of people I'm attracted to. So there's kind of like a red flag that comes up when you see certain candidates, and there's a positive flag, kind of like something you could attract to, something that you could appeal to. If somebody is into violence, they might like a more violent candidate. Some people who are a little bit more hardcore, they might like somebody who's like, okay, let's go over here and annihilate the enemy. But it sounds like what you're talking about is a culture. Now, what role does money play in that system? Let's go into a little bit more about your book when you talk about raising funds for that belief and that core of beliefs.
Well, first, let me just real quick say that I don't. It's funny. It's one of those really funny things. There's not one person who says, everybody believes, okay, there's way too much money in politics, right? Everybody says that. Every elected official, every member, of the Senate and the U.S. Senate, U.S. House, but yet nobody wants to actually, change the amount of money that is involved. Do campaign finance reform at the truest sense. But at the same time, the money that I'm talking about in my book is just more, if I'm going to be running for this local office, how much money do I need to effectively get my message out? And that's one of the things that's so costly today, right, is that there's no longer just one single medium to get your message across. There used to just be radio, and then there was just radio and TV. Well, now there's radio and TV and Twitter and Facebook, and where do people get their news from? Our 18 to 34 demographic, most of those people get their news online, on Politico and all these different, online resources for news. So you still, as a local candidate, have to determine, you have to build a budget. I'm actually looking right now, I can see some political yard signs going up when you drive around. So you have to have a budget for that. So how do I know how much I need to raise? And obviously a local candidate we're not talking anywhere near the kind of amounts of money to run a statewide campaign, not even thinking for a second about the kind of money it takes to run a presidential campaign. But it's important to be able to, know that, okay, I need to win this council race, I need to raise, $4,000 so I can get, enough yard signs and spend some money on a newspaper advertising or send out or do a radio ad or a television ad. All those things cost, money, and I try to you can't get too specific in the book because every media market obviously
is different. Yeah. Well,
and what it costs and those type of things.
Let me give you a tagline real quick. Everybody, I'm talking to Kristen Olmi. We were talking about her book, Winning Elections, A Blueprint for the Public Servants and Us All. I actually have the copy that was screwed up, but she has the original copy can be purchased at method8inc.com or amazon.com. Kristen is a published author. She is a advocate and she in democracy. Again, you're listening to The Mediator with me, your host, Brian West. I am sparksless today without my co-host with me. She got sick, so hopefully she gets well. We are talking to Kristen Olmi again. She is the author of Winning Elections, A Blueprint for the Public Servant and Us All. As we get down to the last 5 minutes, we will give her a little bit more time to talk, to tell you where you can get her book, why you should get her book, and where you can find her at. Again, we're in The Mediator with me, Brian West. Now, Kristen, before we get down to the last nitty gritty of this show, what are some of the qualifications for candidates?
Well, my first and biggest qualification is knowing what office you're going to run for and what you can do. You can't, in the state of Ohio, you can't be, a township trustee doesn't pave county roads.
Yeah.
So you can't run and say I'm going to pave this county road. I think the first qualification though is just knowing, obviously meeting whatever statutory requirements are required for that position. If you're going to run for the mayor, you have to live in that city.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
So the simple qualifications, and then beyond that, just an understanding of I'm not somebody that thinks that everybody, that you need to have a PhD or a law degree or anything of that nature. As long as you understand what your office does, what you can do as a candidate. I do think education is important, but I don't think that's an automatic disqualifier.
Yeah.
I don't think that being able to speak in public is an important characteristic. Being able to communicate your ideas and articulate the changes that you want to make. Having some understanding. I mean, it's important though to be able to have some understanding of, budgets and what you can spend money on, what your responsibility is for the jurisdiction you're running in. Depending on the office, you can't run for judge without a law degree. If you're going to be handling, legal issues, then you should certainly have a legal background and the degree requirement. Same thing for, if you're going to be run for an auditor position, I would hope that you would have some experience in accounting and being having some type of professional qualifications for that. Same thing with.
What is that about you talk about skeletons in the closet a lot. You said if you have certain skeletons in the closet, then you might not want to run. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think one of the most important things that I encourage any candidate to do is at the end of the day you have to do a personal assessment. And if there's things in your background that could come out and could cause a problem or voters would question, you have to make the decision if you're still going to run, but then either handle that appropriately. You have a lot of candidates who have back tax issues.
Oh wow!
For whatever reason, they didn't pay their taxes, or and if you have, perhaps your reason is because your spouse got very sick, and you had to make a choice whether to pay hospital bills or your taxes. Okay, maybe there's certain that's up to the voters to decide if your reasons for not doing that were good enough or not.
Yeah.
But I try to address, if you have maybe you had an affair on your spouse.
Yeah.
If that's something that you think could be a problem, you need to address it before your opponent does. It's just the point I'm kind of talking about in that chapter. Because you would much rather that you bring it to the table and say, I think that
I see what you're saying,
Yeah, I think people respond to everybody being human.
Yeah.
You could come out and say, okay, this was the situation. Here's what happened. It was a mistake. I apologize for it. I have done everything to correct it. And I think if you come clean with the voters, that a lot of people do accept that. But a lot of candidates don't do a personal assessment, and then when something comes out, they're kind of blindsided by it, and that's sort of why I talk about that. I devote some time to it, just saying you should know if you've got something that voters would find questionable, and if you do, then you just have to address it appropriately.
Wow. Well, everybody, you're listening to The Mediator with me, your host, Brian West. I am without my co-host today, Sparks. She is sick. And if you want to donate to the program, that's method8inc.com. You can always donate, spend your time and register if you want to donate for the future. Just register for, we send out our shows on email, things like that. We're talking to Kristen Olmi. She is the published author of Winning Elections, a blueprint for the public servant and us all. She is very established and just very excited. She's got a big future ahead of us. So when we are down to the last 4 minutes of the program, Kristen, what events do you have coming up so people can know where to find you and talk a little bit more, with you? That's what authors do. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I've got the first thing we're going to do, I've got a nice public event at the end of April that's going to be on Thursday, April 30th at a local Austintown library in Mahoning County. I'm going to be just kind of doing a book presentation and doing some book signings. And I'm really, you could check things out on, the website, and we'll try to get some dates over to Method 8.
Oh, great.
Post some stuff on the website.
Yeah.
Just, I'm open to speaking with any small groups or candidates or anybody that's interested in learning a little bit more about the political process and of becoming a candidate.
Yeah.
I'm just going to kind of be, this is my first sort of really media discussion on the book. I haven't been really rolling things out yet, but definitely over the next coming months and certainly into, a presidential year, there's going to be lots of opportunity to talk about the book and getting involved, and just want people, if you're interested in running for office and you've never really thought, well, how do I go about doing that, or just learning more about becoming a candidate, it's a great book. It's just it's pretty small. It's an easy read. It's not anything complicated, and that's just first of all. I just want, if one person that wants to run for office to pick this book up and it can help them and guide them through the process, then I've, accomplished what I sought to accomplish with this. I
want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Kristen, stay on the line. We want to thank everybody for tuning into the Mediator this week. Next week, we're going to talk about the Holy Month. We're going to bring one of specialists at Method 8. She is Miss Andrea. She's going to talk about Holy Month and the importance of getting into the spirit of the Holy Month. She's going to talk about Easter and things like that. So I want to thank you for coming on, Kristen, and everybody, please support her. And you will see more of Kristen, I'm sure, in the future. Wish you luck in the future. So thanks. I want to thank everybody for tuning to the Mediator with the Mediator of Democracy, Brian West. A shout out to Sparks out there. If you're listening, hope you feel better soon. Have a good week, everybody. Have a good week and work hard and read Kristen's book, and tune in next week in the Mediator with me, your host, Brian West, and Alishia Sparks. I took it on myself today, Kristen. I took it on myself, and I did a good job. We did an excellent job. You did well. All right, everybody, I'm going to get off the air here. The music should be fading in soon. Enjoy yourselves. Be safe out there. As the world turns down, look up, and it will get better. Have a good week, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to The Mediator with me, your host, Brian West, everybody.
To News Talk 790 WPIC, Sharon Hermitage, a Cumulus station sponsored by the Ridgewood at Shenango Valley, a premier senior living residence.
An unexpected gathering of the United Nations. Filling up is costing less. I'm Molly Page. An emergency meeting of the UN Security Council is underway as members discuss the unstable situation in Yemen. Senior UN correspondent Richard Roth is in New York.
The Security Council will hear a briefing from its special representative who's been trying for over a year to bring some type of transition to democracy in Yemen, but to no avail. And there'll be speeches by Yemen and Qatar representing the Gulf Cooperation Council.
Funeral services are underway for the 7 young siblings of an Orthodox Jewish family who died in yesterday's early morning house fire in Brooklyn, New York. Their mother and sister remain in critical condition at a burn center. Prices at the pump are edging back down. Industry analyst Trilby Lundberg says the average national price of a regular gallon of gas dropped 4 cents in the last 2 weeks. It's now $2.50 nationwide. I'm Molly Page. Texas Senator Ted Cruz is expected to announce his plans to run for president tomorrow, and other politicians are weighing in. Correspondent Ann Cates reports.
Cruz had become the first high-profile Republican to formally enter the 2016 race for the White House. On CNN's State of the Union, Arizona Senator John McCain was asked if Cruz can lead the GOP to victory against potential Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton.
If the Republican Party nominates him, I do. He is a valued member of the Senate Armed Services Committee.
But California Governor Jerry Brown blasted Cruz on CBS's Face the Nation for his recent comments about climate change alarmists and says the Texas senator's views are not backed by science.
I think that man has rendered himself absolutely unfit to be running for office.
Cruz could unveil his candidacy during a speech at Liberty University in Virginia. I'm Ann Cates.
Insurgent is the top draw at the box office this weekend. According to Rent Track estimates, the second installment of the Divergent series takes in $54 million. I'm Molly Page.
Have you ever thought about publishing a book, but just didn't know how to do it? Well, at Method 8, we try to make publishing simple. You ask questions, we give you answers. You want a book? We find the right option for you to publish. When you need advice about getting your methods out to the world, Method 8 is the place to call. Register today at method8inc.com, where we make ideas seem simple.
Sometimes being alone can be peaceful and help you get centered. However, when being alone turns into loneliness, it can be a major health concern. Correspondent John Stolness reports.
Researchers at Brigham Young University say loneliness could be the next big public health risk, right up there with obesity and substance abuse. Their study found that a person who says they feel lonely most of the time have an increased risk of death by 26%. People who are socially isolated, meaning they have no social connection with the world around them, have an increased mortality risk of 29%. And people who live alone fare the worst, with a 32% mortality risk increase. The study was published in the journal Perspectives on Psychological Science. I'm John Stolness.
In the NCAA, for the second straight year, Michigan State bounced Virginia from the big dance. The Spartans upended the Cavaliers 60-54 in East Regional play in Charlotte. They'll face either Oklahoma or Dayton in the Sweet 16. I'm Molly Page.